Good afternoon. Welcome to the afternoon sessions. This is the first of the afternoon sessions after our keynote. We will have talks about research software, and we will hear from speakers from both Australia and New Zealand. Actually, Australia is going to be even more represented in this session than New Zealand. So really happy to see the diversity of locations. And our first speaker today is Tom Honeyman from Australian Research Data Commons, who will be talking about a national agenda for research software in Australia. Over to you, Tom. And I'm just going to add questions for Tom and for other speakers. Please put them in the question and answers box. You have a control on your right-hand side where you can type in the questions, and we will take these questions to the presenters after each talk. So this time really over to you, Tom.
Now I'm speaking. Okay, sorry. I won't introduce myself again. Thanks for that, Alexandra. So the Australian Research Data Commons is a transformational initiative that enables Australian research community and industry access to nationally significant leading-edge data-intensive platforms, skills, and collections of high-quality data. And our mission is to accelerate research and innovation by driving excellence in the creation, analysis, and retention of high-quality data sets. Now, part of that work involves a new initiative in research software, starting with the release of a draft national agenda for research software to bring the relevant stakeholders together, stimulate discussion, and agree on common aims. So, recognition of research software as a first-class output is the strategic aim that serves as the starting point for the research software agenda. Everything that I'm talking about today is basically plans to work towards this single strategic aim. So first off, we are dealing with software outputs that could be considered research outputs. Let me say straight up that I'm concerned in this work about the creation of software first and foremost, while in many communities, the availability and effective reuse of software tools is actually the key concern. But bear with me because everything is connected. So another important bit, just what is research software? Honestly, I sat through 6 months of an international group trying to define this, and the conclusion was it's very hard to define. But I'll tell you what it means to me. Simply put, because I'm interested in outputs, I'm interested in software created primarily in aid of research. I'm also interested in not talking about research software as just one thing. What I've landed on, and bear with me on this, is that research software is really one of three things. And I should say I've landed on this, but it was very much inspired by other sources, which you can read in the agenda itself. But so first of all, what I call research data processes as research software is the scripts, code, notebooks, workflows, and other forms of code that are created during a research project in aid of a research outcome. These are often single use, and most critically, they are almost never shared. This is not just analysis code, but also the often invisible steps that precede it. The second type of software is the novel methods, or what I'm calling the novel methods and models captured as research software, that are the prototype tools for others to use, often hastily created during a funding cycle, and most commonly fit for purpose within the bounds of that funded project. The third type of software is accepted methods and models as research software infrastructure. And this software is created primarily for research purposes that capture the more stable and accepted knowledge about science. This can be science and research. This can be mathematical concepts used very broadly, or it could be the knowledge or techniques of a very narrow area of research, but one which is entirely uncontroversial within that domain. I think for this audience, it should be immediately recognizable as a another way of putting a software stack as well. So these types of software build upon each other. So based on the work of Dan Katz, I'd say that these three types of software align really neatly with different types of authors or software authors or author personas, if you like. When we're talking about research data processes, we're mainly talking about researchers doing ordinary research and writing software in aid of their research. When we're talking about novel methods and models, we are talking about what I call nascent research software engineers. But across the literature, you might see the phrase researchers who code or coder scientists, or if you want to think about it in terms of roles, this is a space really thoroughly occupied by postdocs across the sector. And then with the third type of software, that's those accepted methods and models as research software. Really, we're talking about software engineers or research software engineers who are developing and maintaining this type of software. Note that the funnel shape is no mistake here. There are lots of researchers and not very many research software engineers. Three challenges consistently emerge across the literature on research software. The first concerns the visibility of software. Can we see this software? There is a lot of energy around software citation, software publishing, credit, and acknowledgement amongst key members of the research software community. Similarly, there is a lot of concern in various research domains about the role of code availability and computational reproducibility, and their broader relationship with research integrity. It's also fairly common to see discussion revolve around best practices for software development and software engineering, particularly around the application of theory and practices of professional software developers and engineers operating in or translating within a research space. Finally, critical research software infrastructure often struggles to be maintained. The $64,000 question is, how can we do this better? And I mean this for both the software itself and the workforce. So if you want to think of the workforce as a kind of soft infrastructure. These three concerns actually neatly align with our software types. They're not mutually exclusive in their alignment, however. But if we arrange these into a grid, so the software types and the concerns, we can see that these are the sweet spots for action. Research data processes as research software are not generally shared, but they need to be. Novel methods and models as research software can be notably improved by the application of best practices. And accepted methods and models as research software infrastructure struggle to be maintained, but really need to be done well when it underpins so much research. Above the diagonal, I'd argue that these concerns are minimal to irrelevant and should not take up our energy. We don't need to over-engineer single-use code. It should work for sure, but it primarily plays a role in the provenance of a research result. And similarly, while we may want to preserve this record of work done, this is not the same thing as maintaining that record of work done. For novel tools, they are by definition not maintained, unless they become broadly used, in which case they're not novel. Below the diagonal is a bit different. Visibility is key, and there's work to be done across all three different types of research software, particularly for acknowledgement, but the solutions and impact are different. Sharing analysis code is not the same as publishing software made for others to use. Good research software infrastructure should be well engineered, but I accept that it is not always the case. I'd say this relates more to the fact that the boundary between new and accepted software tools is just not clear. So again, these three concerns of visibility, fit for purpose expression, and maintenance are the key concerns for each type of software, but not necessarily exclusively so. The draft National Agenda for Research Software is built around this simple framework with the underlying assumptions that I've just laid out. I'm using a bit of catchy alliteration to keep the message clear. We need to see, shape, and sustain research software in order to gain recognition of research software as a first-class output of research. And then each layer in the framework neatly clusters some of the key concerns repeatedly put forward by the community. For instance, To see research software, we need to focus on citation, curation, management, the application of FAIR principles, and more generally, the integration or the interaction with the scholarly ecosystems or publications in particular, FAIR data, and platforms. Back to our primary aim. Recognition implies a shift in thinking. We are seeking a change in culture. The Centre for Open Science Strategy for Culture Change serves as the starting point for coming up with the actual actions of the agenda. This framework, if you haven't seen it before, is a useful diagnostic, usually considered from bottom to top. For any given action, position it in this pyramid, check that the layers below are present, and look to the layers above to consider what might come next. For instance, when considering advocating for some policy position, you should always consider if what you're asking for is possible, easy, normal practice, and rewarded. If not, it's probably not a good policy, or it might not be the right place to start in terms of action. I use an abbreviated form of this model. Advocacy maps to policy and incentives, and guidance maps to user interface or experience. So I have these 4 areas of advocacy, community, guidance, and infrastructure. For each of the high-level aims of the agenda to see, shape, and sustain research software, we now further consider what we need to make it possible, to make it easy, to make it normal, and codified to fulfill the aims to see, shape, and sustain research software. So to see research software, we need the relevant infrastructure, which would include informatics infrastructure like identifiers, vocabularies, metadata, but also authorship, development, and publishing platforms. In the areas of guidance relevant to seeing research software, we need to have guidance on citation, software publishing, the application of FAIR principles to research software, and the recognition of research software in data provenance, and also guidance around computational reproducibility. The relevant communities are the researcher and research support communities. Researchers in particular for defining the specifics of software citation within their scholarly communities, and also the specific needs of computational reproducibility within their specific communities, and researcher support to interpret or guide practice around publishing and the more general application of the FAIR principles. The relevant area of advocacy is essentially code availability. In order to make software more visible, we need to advocate for people to share their analysis code in particular. And that analysis code then serves as the raw materials for connecting the scholarly impact in the form of the publication that accompanies that code back to the underlying research software infrastructure that the analysis code was built upon. Right, when we're talking about shaping research software for best and easiest reuse, the relevant area of infrastructure is the software assets themselves. The area of guidance is for those nascent research software engineers, software development and engineering practices. The relevant communities are what I call the bridges between research and software engineering. So this conference is a form of national community where I think we can have a good discussion about bridging the space between research and software engineering. And the relevant area of advocacy, this is the big one, is credit for new software. That includes both the recognition for software as a scholarly output and also the kinds of funding that we might need to properly develop the space. When we're talking about the sustaining research software, the tack that I like to take is to really focus on the people as the necessary form of infrastructure rather than the software itself, and how we can build out and properly distribute that capability across the nation. The relevant area of guidance is less on the technical aspects and more on the professional career concerns of a software engineer or a research software engineer. And the relevant community is the career concerns for RSEs. So that's easily mapped to RSE AUNZ in our transnational context. And the relevant area of advocacy is to take sustaining research software seriously. So that's all 12 actions of the agenda in summary form. I've read across, but you can also read down the columns. If, for instance, you work in training, you may prefer to just consider the areas of guidance. If you work in policy, you may prefer to read down the advocacy column instead. And then finally, what are the next steps? So this draft agenda has been in a validation phase for the last couple of months. We had greater than 170 individuals in Australia who've interacted with that release, from a simple endorsement through to an in-depth discussion. We've had really good international interest in the agenda framework, more than 1,000 views of the document itself. So I am now working to synthesize that feedback into a final form of the agenda, and planning with my colleague Paula a set of activities for the ARDC to undertake within that framework to address the actions of the agenda. Thank you, everyone. If you want to read the agenda itself, there's a web address there, bit.ly/RS-agenda. There's my email address if you've got any questions. I'm very happy to take those offline or to answer them now if they've come up at all.
Thank you very much, Tom. I am just struggling with my other screen and getting the questions to load whilst I am fighting with my laptop. I wanted to ask you if we actually did have a chat about this a while ago. What would be the ideas to perhaps work with us in New Zealand regarding the work that you're doing in Australia, and how would you foresee that, or how would you like us to, what would be the ideal way for New Zealand to take it further?
I think the obvious starting point is the relevant communities. I see no reason for us to stick strictly to national boundaries when we're talking about that. So we already have that in the professional, well, not professional, but the RSE AUNZ group, but it's also true for those bridges. When I think of the kinds of events or communities that are relevant in that middle layer around shaping research software for best and easiest reuse, the kinds of events that are relevant are this one, which is actually in New Zealand and brings together Australians and New Zealanders. But also research communities themselves don't really know national bounds, and so I don't see why we can't, in our roughly same time zone, all work together on those areas as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And I can see finally the questions, and we have a question from Roland Losbergen, who is asking, given the 40,000 jobs lost in universities in Australia and the low NHMRC success rates, where do we find resources to support the RSC community in Australia?
Yeah, there's no doubt about it that it's been a pretty devastating couple of years in the research sector in Australia, and that we're pretty stretched for resources at the moment. For those people that are floating around in the sector, I really think about this agenda in more of a 7-year timescale rather than the acute pain that we're going through at the moment. And so I think that we have to look to the future, really, to think about where those resources come from, rather than well, I don't mean to diminish the pain that's being felt right now and the pretty severe job losses, but this is a long-term proposition.
Thank you very much. And thanks so much for your talk. We will move to the next presentation. And this one focuses on supporting fair principles for research software and supporting the adoption guidelines for the fair principles for research software. And it's a shared talk between again, Tom and his colleague Paula, Andrea Martinez from Australian Research Data Commons, and Georgina from New Zealand eScience Infrastructure. So I hand over to all of you.
Thank you, Alexandra. And thanks, Tom, for that presentation to kick off this session. I think it feeds really well into this talk. And this one zeroes in on one aspect of what needs to happen in that research software space. So first off, Ko George Aho. I'm working here. So my name's George. I'm working here with Paula and Tom. And really how that combination is working is Paula and Tom have been heavily involved in the international work to develop and eventually share out with communities the Fair for Research software principles. And where I come into the mix is I'm really interested in understanding what these mean for the Aotearoa New Zealand context, and what we at NZRSE can do to help with that. So I'll kick that off with a little bit of New Zealand context, and then I'll hand over to the experts, Paula and Tom, to take you through where everything is at internationally. And so I will call out that there has been a bunch of different groups contributing into this work. It's a formalized part of the Research Data Alliance working group. There is a formalized working group within that Research Data Alliance called the Fair for Research Software Working Group. There's a Force 11 working group, and there's also the Research Software Alliance Task Force, which is another international group contributing in here. So a Venn diagram would have all of those groups overlapping in terms of membership with slightly different goals out the end, but definitely an example of lots of collaboration. And as you can see in the flow diagram, a really careful step through of making sure that there's an agreement on what the Fair for Research software principles need to be in relation to research software, and then a really considered approach for how they get adopted. Why is this interesting to New Zealand? I have racked my brains over this for a New Zealand specific reason, and I'd be really interested to see that come through a bit in the discussion. Is there something really specific to how New Zealand is dealing with research software which make these of particular importance? But I think it's clear that as a group of researchers or people involved in coding for research software engineers, without layering in some of the principles into your work, it's going to be quite difficult to for organizations to look at things like career progression and recognition. So I think there's those really personal benefits for looking at the Fair for Research software principles, but then there's also all of the benefits that come around collaboration and enabling you to do better research in a bigger, broader context. Now, I'll leave this slide up, but what I wanted to do was point everyone at the live poll that's going on, and I can see there's something like 19 people who have participated already. what we'd really like to understand is, how familiar are you with the FAIR for Research software principles? And we've asked, could you describe them to a colleague? It's always the litmus test. And the other question we have there is basically, how much support do you think you've got from your organization to enable you to apply these principles? Oh yes, absolutely. Get sharing, and people can keep yeah, if we could share those, and people can keep contributing in there. And the other thing we're really interested to learn from you guys, and the way we're going to do this is through the live Q&A, is what would you like to hear about next in this space? And you might not have the answer right now. It might not be until the end of the session, but you know, do you want to learn more about what the principles are? Do you want to have workshops on how to apply them? Do you need some more lobbying to your organizations? Have a think through this talk, and then we can look at what we can roll out in New Zealand with that in mind. Now I am going to pass over to Paula.
Hello, can you hear me all right? Good, thanks. Thanks, Georgina, for that nice presentation. My name is Paula Martinez. I am one of the co-chairs of the FAIR for IS group, and it says that 23% of you ask what is FAIR for IS, so maybe I should start with that. FAIR for IS are recommendations for research software to be more fundable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. They are based on the FAIR recommendations for data, and we are trying to find the specific features that software has that need to be described for people who are authoring research software, for them to make their research software fair. As part of the working group, what we do is a lot of collaboration. So reinforcing on what Georgina said, we are a global group, and just tagging along the last keynote speaker, I think this is an opportunity for New Zealand to be a leader and not just a follower. So everyone is welcome to participate from these activities. And what we try to do is have different activities where people can provide input from very small amount of time to really committing to the group and being representative. Like Tom, for example, is one of the champions in the group who's been involved, even being outside of the steering committee, right? So our working group has set deadlines for 1.5 years. We are currently in the 1 year milestone. We have 6 months to go. And what has happened in the first year is that we organized subgroups to be able to complete our first milestone, which was defining the FAIR principles for research software. What happened before is that we took a look at what is FAIR for research software, and examine different contexts of research software from scratch. It was led by Dan Katz. There's a publication from that was cited in the slide before. And I also put in the discussion forum the URL to the group where you can find all of these resources. There was another subgroup looking at FAIR principles applied to different other digital outputs, for example, workflows, notebooks, and training material that they also slide features to highlight for FAIR. Then the third group that was already mentioned by Tom is defining the research software. We wanted to have this group really thinking about what's the definition to limit the scope of the FAIR principles. A lot of people have this question. This is still work in progress. We have a definition. It's been evaluated by the community, and we want to share that with you as well. And the number 4 was trying to find new research after a publication that was put in the public in 2019, which was kind of the first effort into this translation of the FAIR principles. It's called Towards FAIR Principles for Research Software. And the word towards is key because we knew that we wanted more community feedback and establish a generalized consensus of the principles, not just the authors of this paper. If we go to the next slide, please. What has come up after those 4 subgroups and a lot of engagement activities and collaborations internationally is this paper that is already linked through the RDA, the Research Software Alliance. It has a deal authors, but we also have all of the FAIR4IS members as an author. You can read this document. It has a lot of explanation about the principles, and also we're trying to find a few examples. It's been reviewed by the community members in 3 stages. This is in July, the last stage of the review has completed, and now the chairs of the working group are putting the final version of it, which is not going to change too much from this version. It's just that we want to adopt the format that the journal requires. That's all that I want to say of the work that we've been doing. And now Tom is going to talk about the next steps that we are starting since this month.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, the link is shared in the chat as well.
Okay, so on to the actual subgroups. So these subgroups will be running from right now until December this year, when we aim to report on the findings of those subgroups. Next slide, thanks. The first subgroup, subgroup 5, is around adoption guidelines and aims to identify and review existing resources and create new resources that facilitate the adoption of the FAIR4RS principles. Next slide, thanks. The second subgroup is around adoption support. I really draw your attention here if you think you're an exemplar software project. The adoption support subgroup aims to identify software projects and organizations willing to adopt the FAIR4RS guidelines. Next slide, thanks. And the third subgroup is on the topic of governance. And the primary task of this group is to work up a communications plan and content that clarifies the governance structure to the community from the release onwards. Next slide, thanks. We'd like to acknowledge the all 220 members and contributors of the FAIR4 Research Software Working Group, or FAIR4RS. Also the present and past steering committee members for coordinating a range of activities, and the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation and Wellcome Trust for their support. At the bottom there, you'll see a link to the group. I think if you just Google for FAIR4RS too, it's such a unique name, you should land on it really quickly. And thank you very much for your attention, and on to questions.
So I'd like to perhaps go back to what you wanted to raise in the well, first of all, to have a look at the poll results, if we can have a look at that. And can we ask for the poll results to be shared and visible? Are they shared and visible? I can see them, but I know that I may have a very different view than most of the audience. Can we see this? Can everybody see? Yeah, okay, excellent. So the first question, how familiar are you with the FAIR principles for research software? And could you describe the FAIR for research software to a colleague? And the huge majority of people say sort of, but don't quote me. And about a third said, what is FAIR for research software? Which I hope after this talk will be clear. And then about 10% said absolutely. And I wonder if those who said sort of, but don't quote me, what kind of hesitation and clarification would you like? So if you can put that maybe in the Q&As. So what clarification from our presenters? This is your chance to get more confident and go to the group that says absolutely. And whilst we're waiting for these, I guess the next one, how committed is your institution to make research software fair at the moment? And interesting, 41% said somewhat. And I really wonder what is behind that. So what are the actual things that the organizations are doing? And then, almost the same amount of people said not sure, which perhaps is the fact that the organizations are not doing anything or not communicating about this. And only 7 are sure that there's nothing at all being done. And about 14% that it's encouraging. So, I can put that in the screen share. Okay. I hope that, you still see them. So I'm going to have a look if we have we have Eric in the questions. So Eric asks, one of the main challenges around FAIR for research software seems to be the sustainability of research software past its usefulness for the original author developer. What incentives could be explored to help in this space? So sustaining, what are the incentives to sustain research software after a researcher, a group of researchers who developed and used it, don't use it anymore? Who would like to answer it?
I can have a go at this. And Eric, it's a really good question and something that I don't know the answer. I don't know what incentives as such could be put in place, but I do know that there's a huge education piece that's still required. I don't think the groups funding the initial research project where that software is developed have any comprehension of what is involved in maintaining a piece of software so it's still usable and still contributes back into that research area afterwards, after the project. So I think there is an education piece for the funders, for the managers, the leaders, but I'm interested to hear from the others as well.
Yeah, can I give some words about that? So the example that was put up in the keynote speaker about Weka and Moa River, for example, those are research softwares that how will they get maintained over the years is we will ask for it. There is already millions of users, and the moment that this software is not sustained anymore, they're all going to scream out, I need this. So this institution is displaying the software and putting visibility on it. Hey, we have this. This is for you. It's helpful. And this is that many downloads this is useful for. And that's the way that we can encourage all the institutions to promote the research software so it's visible. And they also know how to cite it. And they also know to contact when this thing it's going to towards the end of the grant cycle, right? And then the community themselves, because they see this as a beneficial digital object, they would like to contribute to it. There's many examples of that in the open source community. So let's encourage that behavior.
Thanks very much. Thanks for this comment. Great to hear about FAIR for research software, and I can see comments from the audience that they're happy to hear about this as well. So big thanks to all of you. And we have one more talk, also from Australian Research Data Commons, for Matthias Liffers, on co-opting academic recognition systems for research software. Matthias, over to you.
Thank you, Alexandra. Kaya Wanju and Kia ora koto. My name is Matthias Liffers. I'm from the Australian Research Data Commons, as Alexandra said, and I've just popped a link into the discussion forum for my slides. I've got a few more links in there, but it's a lightning talk, so I can't go through things in detail. First off, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I'm on. So I'm 5,500 kilometers away from Auckland. I'm on Whadjuk Noongar Budja, and I'd like to pay my respects to the elders past, present, and future. And I'd like to extend that respect to any further First Nations people here today. So sees the means of citation flashed up very briefly. What are we talking about? I want to basically go in on a very, very small part of what Tom was talking about. He mentioned software citation. Now, software citation isn't necessarily, in fact, it's absolutely not a common practice, unfortunately. Either the process of making software easily citable or citing the software that you have used when writing a paper. Now, why should we care about software citation? Well, first and foremost, if we want to assert that, or at least try to get people thinking that research software is a first-class output of research, alongside things like papers, right? And papers really are the number one. That's the big currency of research outputs. We should possibly consider treating research software a bit more like research papers when it comes to recognition of the work that's gone into them and including them for consideration in academic promotion or things like that. Now, at the risk of covering something that everybody here already knows about, I'd just like to do a very, very quick and dirty recap of the publication and citation process. So, an author is writing a paper and they want to cite a source. So they're building on somebody else's work. They want to cite a source. What do? They use an in-text citation of some kind, and then they add a full reference to that source in their reference list. Then after the paper's been published, a citation indexing system of some kind reads through that, looks through the reference list, and notes which papers have been cited, which sources have been cited. And then those citations are counted, and those counts are then available in Google Scholar, in Web of Science, in Scopus, and what have you. And researchers use those citation counts, generally Google Scholar because it's the most generous, and puts those numbers on their CV when they're applying for grants, when they're applying for academic promotion, or indeed when they're just applying for a job in the first place. Now, this process doesn't really happen yet when it comes to software. Unfortunately, it's really hard to for a researcher, a research software engineer, anybody who writes research software to demonstrate that their software is being used. So, how do we make software citable? One possibility is to publish a traditional paper in a traditional journal and ask your users to cite that paper if they use your software when writing their own papers. The problem is you have to write a paper. You have to put it through peer review. And this takes a very, very long time, months or even years. It's not great for versioning. And because software does change its behavior from version to version, it's not great for research reproducibility. And then the authorship on the paper might not match the authorship of the software itself. So there are two possibilities that are available now effectively for making software citable. The first option is to publish in a software journal like the Journal of Open Source Software. Check it out. It's a fantastic resource. Or alternatively, what you could do is push your code directly from a code repository to a research repository. And that research repository then takes care of long-term archiving, providing you with a DOI that you can get people to cite. Now, rather than going through the step-by-step process of this, I've only got a couple of minutes left. I'd like to point you towards some of the resources that the ARDC has produced in this area. And I'd like to very much thank Paula Martinez for her assistance in getting this all bundled together and made pretty. And also Tom, basically, for helping me write this guide. So I'm not going to show you the guide, but the guide is quick and easy and very accessible, and we would like it to be shared and reused as widely as possible. Much like that container video that Paula showed everybody yesterday. And then on top of that guide, I've also developed a slide deck with some speaker notes that you can use and reuse. You can rip our branding off if you want, feel free, to spruik the message to your colleagues, essentially. So I've got links there. I've already shared the link to this slide deck. Go nuts, have a look. And other than that, thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Matthias. I'm seeing that actually there's a lot of discussion developing on the discussion forum, more than in the Q&A session, and there are some questions. Well, some more discussion regarding the incentives, and one thing that I guess somehow relates to what you were saying, and the actions that organizations can undertake or institutions, and what would be the actionable items that we can take forward to our institutions as suggestions to even start them on that, and where to point those who are decision makers to what resources, so that they would be to catch their attention. I wonder what are your comments regarding that, especially that they are happy with the they know what the recognition system, how it works now, but how we would get their attention towards the research software.
So we've already sort of seen this journey with research data. So if you were to talk to anybody 20 or even maybe 10 years ago and say, hey, research data, let's cite it, let's put it in repositories, let's share it, they'd look at you funny. Well, except in certain disciplines that were well ahead of the curve. But we are finding increasingly that funders and publishers are requiring data to be made available. And I foresee that a similar thing is going to happen with research software. And to be honest, a lot of publishers already want the software to be made available alongside the data. It's just nobody's really paid much attention to that just yet. But if you have a look at the Nature magazine, Nature is one of the most significant journals in the world. Their code, they have a requirement for code to be made available for peer review. And if you don't make your code available, they will knock you, they reserve the right to say, no, we're not publishing. So I think that the funders and the publishers are going to start making more noise about this. And then when that happens, then to be honest, institutions will simply have to follow on with that. Because if you want a publication in Nature, and everybody wants a publication, well, not everybody, but most people want a publication in Nature. So they'll simply have to do what Nature requests. But at the other end of the scale, we have organizations like the ARDC thinking a lot about this. So Tom and Andrew's paper on the software agenda has been noticed and we've consulted widely. Well, sorry, Tom's consulted widely. And it's being put in front of very important decision makers.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for that. And yeah, I agree that kind of a bit of a pressure that starts coming from the publishers is going to be really important. I would love to see more of this community discussion as it's happening here in our virtual forum to carry on. And yeah, it's great to see that we're raising awareness about things like FAIR principles extending to research software. So big thanks to all the presenters for today's sessions and all the attendees. Nami Hinui. And we will be finishing this session, but there is one more coming up. We will take a break right and 3:15, so in about 16 minutes, we will resume again. So take a break and join us back at 3:15. Thanks, everyone.